Welcome to High Point University's premier life skills seminar featuring HPU's in-residence leaders and other global change agents.
Nobody can prevent you from choosing the extraordinary. That's been the basis of my work now for almost 40 years. And so I can't think of a better place to kick off the 20th anniversary edition of the Fred Factor than here at High Point, where you choose to be extraordinary, as Jade said. I mean, there's just such synchronicity in what you are learning and doing at the premier life skills university and what I've spent my career doing, which is studying and understanding as well as practicing leadership. I live in Denver, Colorado, and I had something happen to me that changed my life. You know, a moment is 90 seconds. People think a moment is just a second or two, but a moment is actually 90 seconds. But in a moment, you can change your life, you can have your life changed, you can change another person's life. And my life literally changed in a moment. Many years ago, when I first moved to Denver, Colorado, I bought a house in an area of Denver called Washington Park. It's kind of a inner city suburb, and I've lived in my new house all of about 2 or 3 days when there was a knock on the front door. I opened the front door, and standing there was a relatively short fellow. He's about 5'2", 5'3", maybe weighed 115, 120 pounds. He had a pencil-thin mustache. He was wearing a blue-gray uniform and carrying a bag. And he said, "Good morning, Mr. Sanborn. My name is Fred. I am your postal carrier. I just stopped by to introduce myself and welcome you to the neighborhood." Now, like you, I've been receiving mail all of my adult life. I don't ever remember getting a personal introduction to the postal carrier, but I thought that was kind of a nice touch. I said, "Fred, thanks for stopping by." I said, "I do not have a real job. I'm a professional speaker and author." And he said, "Well, if you're an author and a speaker, you probably travel a lot." Now, back then, I was traveling about 220 days a year. And I told him that. And he said, "Great, if you'll just give me your calendar so that I know when you're in town. I'll hold your mail for you. I'll bundle it. I'll only deliver it on the days that you're here to receive." I never had a choice a la carte mail service before either. I said, "Fred, you know, that's probably not necessary. I have a steel box nailed here next to the front door. Why don't you just leave the mail in the box? I'll pick it up when I come back into town." Fred said, "Well, Mr. Sanborn, burglars watch for mail in the box. If your box is full of mail, they know you're out of town, you might get robbed." He said, "Here's what I'd recommend instead." He said, "I'll be glad to put mail in your box as long as the lid closes. That way nobody will know that you're gone. Any mail that doesn't fit in your box, I can put in between the screen door and the front door. Nobody can see it. And if that area becomes too full of mail, I'll hold the rest of your mail for you until you come back into town." Now, Fred is more worried about my mail than I am. But after all, he is the postal professional. So let me just pause for a minute. I want to define professional as someone who's more worried about their customer's problems than the customer is. A professional is somebody who's more worried about you getting a good education than your parents are, or maybe even than you are. A professional lawyer is someone who's more worried about your legal representation than you are. And that doesn't absolve people of responsibility. It simply frees up people to pursue other things. Because I knew Fred had my back when it came time to get my mail delivered. I didn't have to worry about it. When you're at a big university, you know that you obviously have to put the work in, but you don't have to worry about, are you going to get a good education or not? You know that when you retain a lawyer, you don't have to worry about whether he or she is going to represent you well. A professional is more concerned with the solutions to your problems that their service solves than you are. Now, there's a benefit for being that kind of a professional. You create a customer for life. Because customer never thinks about leaving you. Why would they? They know they have complete trust in you that you'll take care of that aspect of your life. And unless you stop doing that or somebody does it better, they'll never not be loyal. So Fred gave me a system for getting my mail. I say, "Okay, Fred, let's try that." I go out of town for a couple of weeks. I come back a couple of weeks later. I'm unlocking the front door. I notice my doormat is missing. I look out on the front porch and I see my doormat's in the corner, but it's covering something. See, here's what had happened. UPS had misdelivered a box of mine 5 doors down, left my box on somebody else's porch. Lucky for me, Fred the postman was on the job. Fred picked up this heavy box, carried it down to my porch, put it in the corner wrote a personal note of explanation on it, then tried to disguise it with a doormat so nobody would take it. I mean, not only is Fred delivering the mail, now he's picking up slack for UPS. I'll let you in on a secret. You want to be successful in life? Solve problems other people created. Because you see, UPS created the problem, but Fred solved it. Fred got credit. And too often we say, well, I didn't cause it. I don't have to solve it. But that's not the way to think about it if you're a business person. Solve problems other people created, and you can win business very, very easily. So I was so impressed with Fred that first Christmas that he was my postal carrier. I left a little gift in the box for him. Just a little gift of appreciation. And the next day the mail got delivered, I had an unusual letter in my mail. See, the letter had a stamp on it, but the stamp wasn't canceled. And I see from the return address, the letter is from Fred Shea. Fred is my postal carrier. See, Fred lived in Northland, I lived in Denver. Fred knew it was a felony to put unposted mail in a box. So even though he carried a letter from his house to my house, he still put a stamp on just to keep it legal. So after I cut the stamp off, I read the letter. Letter said, "Dear Mr. Sanborn, thank you for remembering me at Christmas. I'm flattered that you talk about me in your speeches and seminars. I hope I can continue to provide exceptional service. Sincerely, Fred the Postman." Fast forward the tape. I met my wife, Dara, in 1995. We got married. She moved in. A couple of years later, we moved down to Highlands Ranch where we live today. But for almost 10 years, Fred delivered my mail and then her mail. And even if you had read my book, you would not know this. Fred had been an employee of the United States Postal Service for 27 years when the book came out. He'd never been recognized by his employer. His customers loved him. His coworkers found him inspirational. But nobody higher up in the Postal Service acknowledged and appreciated his work. The first time it happened was after 27 years of service when the book came out. And I said to Fred when I wrote the book, I was curious about why he did it. See, Fred doesn't get paid more. You don't get paid more for giving good or bad service at the United States Postal Service. I'll never forget it. Fred, in one of the most interesting things, as simple as it sounds, I've ever heard, said, "Mark, doesn't everybody do their work this way?" And I said, "Fred, if they did, nobody'd read the book. If they did, it would be commonplace. No, you've taken the ordinary job of delivering the mail and you've made it extraordinary." And the reason he does it, he said, "I lay in bed at the end of the day, I only worry about one thing." And I worry about a lot of stuff. I said, "The only thing I worry about, did I waste any of the day I just finished?" I think I could summarize all 8 of my books in one sentence. Fear nothing but to waste the present moment. Because if you take care of the moments become your life. But we live in a society of perpetually distracted people. We're always thinking about something else. When we're driving, we're texting. When we're texting, we're thinking about a phone call we need to make. And there's an old Zen proverb that says, wherever you're at, be there. And that may be the hardest thing that we have to do now, to be fully engaged in the moment. If you're listening right now, God bless you, but choose to listen. Don't let me trick you into listening. If you're daydreaming, I got no problem with that, but choose to daydream. Because the problem is, a lot of people live life on autopilot. They're not intentional. And if there's ever an intentional person, it's Fred Shea, my postal carrier. Fred retired a few years ago. That was Fred when the first edition of my book came out. And that was Fred 2 years ago. And his wife, Kathy, they still live in Northland. My wife and I are friends with them. We try to have dinner with them every so often so we can stay in touch. Fred is a salt-of-the-earth guy. He's an ordinary guy doing an extraordinary job. By the way, that's all any of us are, ordinary people. We all have the same number of minutes and hours in each day. It's how we choose to use those minutes and hours that determine whether we stay ordinary or we become extraordinary. And so the Fred factor, the reason I wrote the book is I learned that the Fred factor is the ability to continually create new value for the people you live and work with through 3 things you completely control: passion, creativity, and commitment. You may work for an employer someday that doesn't give you resources or training or a budget or support or recognition or appreciation, but you still got the 3 most powerful resources of all: your passion, your creativity, and your commitment. That's why I say my work can be summarized by this idea. Nobody can prevent you from choosing to be extraordinary. Sometimes people say to me, well, you know, Fred Shea, he must have had really good parents. Good parenting, good upbringing, taught the correct way. I tell you this was Fred's permission. Fred said, my parents were terrible role models. They were self-absorbed, self-centered, didn't think of anybody but themselves. And he said something that I like to remind myself and my sons and anyone who will listen. Some people become great because of, more people become great despite. Fred became great despite the fact he didn't have the odds in his favor. And we always assume that people who are successful must have had some lucky break we didn't have. More often than not, they were compensating for the fact that they didn't have the resources that other people had. That's why I was saying nobody can prevent you from choosing to be extraordinary. Ultimately, it is a choice, and that's why High Point says, choose to be extraordinary. So here's the question. The book came out, the first hardback edition came out in 2004. And when I started talking to Penguin Random House about a 20th anniversary edition, the million-dollar question was, 20 years later, is this book still relevant? And I was encouraged that not only did Penguin and Random House believe this, but I concur, the book's more relevant than it's ever been. And I'll tell you why I believe. It was relevant then, it's relevant now. By the way, the reason the book's successful, it's not about Bill Gates or Warren Buffett or Steve Jobs. See, you look at those people and you say, they're the richest people in the world, or we're the richest people in the world. Fred had nothing except his passion, creativity, and commitment to take the commonplace and make it artist. First of all, when you work like Fred does, you have a choice, not about the work you do. You don't always get to choose the work you do. You always get to choose how you do it. People say, Mark, I think I need a new job. I need a different job. I say, you might. That's up to you. But before you get a different job, try the job you've got differently. I guarantee you, there are a lot of people who sleepwalk through delivering mail. They don't like the route they're on. They don't like the people they interact with. They don't like carrying a heavy bag of mail. See, the difference isn't in the circumstance. The difference is in the perspective. Fred thought about, what does this give me an opportunity to do? It gives me an opportunity to get to know people. When I wrote the book, a woman called me and she said, when I was having a difficult time with my daughter when she was in high school, Fred one day did nothing more than listen and encourage me and validate that I was a good mother, and it made all the difference. Now, validating a parent is not part of your job description at the United States Postal Service. But I want to suggest that's what makes Fred extraordinary. It's a little extra, a little above and beyond. See, extraordinary doesn't mean hugely better. It means extra, just a little. And one of the things that I find fascinating about life is it doesn't take nearly as much to be as extraordinary as people think. When you work like Fred, you have choice and you make connections. You meet people who are willing to help you, and when they know that you're willing to help them, that's the basis of a mutually satisfying relationship. People like Fred make good connections. It allows you to be creative. This morning I spoke to a leadership class and I said, substance and style are both important in leadership. Substance has to come first, knowing how to lead and being good at it. But style is your own personal imprint. It's your flourish. I met a guy who believed in the Fred factor, but he was in an engineering firm and he had retired, and he said that his creativity came through his roses. He was a master gardener. I didn't know you could enter roses in a competition, but he was an award-winning gardener of roses. And so whenever somebody wasn't feeling well, he would deliver a rose with a get well card. Whenever somebody faced a tragedy, he would send a sympathy card with a rose. Or if it was a birthday, he'd celebrate with a rose. So he had the creativity of what he could do with his personality, and he applied it to being Fred-like. But here's the big one. When you leave High Point University, you've got a high placement rate. 99% of you will be placed in a job within 6 months of graduating. And you will have a chance to make money. And making money in America is easy. Making money and meaning at your work is hard. So that you go home at the end of every day and you say, you know what, I feel good about what I've been paid, but I also feel good about what I did. And even if I hadn't been paid, I still feel good about it. See, a lot of people, they work during the day for money so they can make meaning at night and on the weekends. They work during the day so at night they can volunteer in a civic group. Or they work during the day, so on the weekends they can coach a little league baseball team or volunteer at their church or synagogue. And that's fine. But what I'm saying is your challenge as you go from the classroom to a career is to do what Fred did and find happiness, satisfaction, and delight and be paid for it at the same time. And that's why after 20 years, I still think the message of the Fred factor is relevant. The message was relevant 2,000 years before the Fred factor. Sun Tzu said, use the ordinary forces to engage, use the extraordinary to win. Ordinary is table stakes. Ordinary is the cost of entry, but it's extraordinary that wins. So in the time we've got left this afternoon, I want to share with you 4.5 principles from the Fred factor that have evolved over time. The principles haven't changed. Some of the stories are new, some of the stories are old, but I always try to communicate principles because principles represent timeless truth. Your challenge is to take that truth and apply it in whatever you do, whoever you do it with, and wherever you live. The first principle of the Fred factor is everyone makes a difference. And you might think, Mark, I've heard that before. I'll tell you what, you actually haven't. You and I grew up being told something slightly different than this. We grew up being told we could make a difference. Your coach says you can make a difference. Your parents say you can make a difference. Your teacher says you can make a difference. Let me ask you something. If you can do something, isn't there an alternative to not do it? In other words, you can or you can't. You will or you won't. You opt in or you opt out. I'm not saying that. I'm saying everybody makes a difference, and the only question is what kind. Are you building people up or are you diminishing? Are you moving the ball down the field for your employer, for your university, for your fraternity, your sorority, or are you taking a loss? See, I believe neutrality is a myth. I've had people say, Mark, I may not be doing this stuff that Fred the postman does. I'm neutral. I keep my nose clean. I follow the rules. I'm neutral. Let me ask you a question. If you met a professor who didn't take an interest in you, if you were in a grocery store and you had a question about a product and the person who worked in the grocery store wasn't helpful, would you say they're neutral? No, you'd say they're indifferent. People who don't take an interest in helping others fairly or unfairly are considered indifferent. And indifference is the #1 killer of business. I'd rather you disagree with me. Sometimes I do business with a customer service rep, and it's like talking to a zombie because they just won't help. And not only that, but they won't even disagree with me. At least it'd be fun to disagree. They're neutral, but by being neutral, they've chosen to create the perception of indifference. So here's a good question to ask yourself. What kind of difference are you making? Good or bad? To choose to be extraordinary means to choose to make a positive difference. And a lot of people are not difference makers, except perhaps in the neutral or indifferent way. Because they weren't told that everybody matters. They were told they could choose to matter. I believe everybody matters. The only question is how. The first job of leadership is to prove to other people their significance. If you've got somebody you know that's discouraged, prove to them that they matter if you want to encourage them. If you're working with somebody that doesn't think what they do in their job matters, show them how what they do in their work impacts others, a customer or a colleague. Because people need to see the connection between what they do and the difference that it makes. And a good leader is able to show people that they have more capability than even they knew. Years ago, I was asked to lead a committee in my professional organization. And what was ironic is I was asked to mediate a conflict between the vendors at our trade show and the association. I hate conflict. I am readily admitting I hate conflict. I don't do it well. Interpersonal conflict bothers me. I try to avoid it. And so I couldn't understand why the president was asking me to mediate this dispute, to deal with this conflict. And she said, Mark, you may not like conflict personally, but you have the ability to mediate it between others. I didn't know that, and it was true. I took the job, I was able to resolve the conflict, and I learned something about leadership. Leaders see in others what others don't see in themselves. We've all had those people in our lives, haven't we? We didn't think we could, and they weren't blowing smoke. They weren't just patronizing us. They genuinely helped us see an ability that we didn't know we had. I say that leadership is an invitation to greatness that we extend to others by example. You know, throughout your life, people will listen to what you say, your colleagues, your coworkers, your kids, your spouse, but they will believe what you do. And if there's discongruity between what you say, what you preach, what you teach, they will just watch to see if you're really doing it. And that's why I say that leadership isn't arrogant. Leadership simply says, I'm choosing to play by a higher standard. I want to be the kind of person that inspires others to play at a higher standard, not discourages them. Leadership is an invitation to greatness we extend to others by example. Do you know why you get out of bed in the morning? For almost a year, I asked a couple hundred audiences, why do you get out of bed in the morning? Very informal, wasn't quantitative research. I just wanted to know. And I got 3 answers in over 100 audiences, only 3. First answer is, I have to. It was a vague sense of obligation. You know, you got to go to class, you got to go to work, you got to go eat breakfast, you got to go take the kids to school. That was as specific as people could get. I have to. Number 2, I'm just being honest with you. People say, because I have to go to the bathroom. Now, does this explain a lot about the people you know? Why'd you come into class today? Well, I was up going to the bathroom, figured you might as well go into class. Most people are more motivated by their bladders than by their beliefs. They're pragmatists. They have to get up because they have to go to the bathroom. Number 3 is my favorite. I was speaking in Seattle, Washington, a woman who was an engineer. That's the operative term, engineer. I said, why do you get out of bed in the morning? And she said, because I stopped sleeping. Wow. Do you know any engineers? This explains a lot. Do you know why an engineer goes to bed? Because they stopped being awake. This is how engineers think. 3 out of every 4 Americans do not have a reason to get up. It's called purpose. It's called a life meaning. It means knowing that no matter what you do every day, it plays into a bigger play. It adds to a bigger picture. This company, Scholastic Books. You remember Scholastic Books? They've been around for over 100 years. Now, when I was a kid, there was nothing digital. They had this 4-color crappy catalog they printed with bad ink, and the ink came off in your fingers. And the teacher would put the catalog on your desk, and you would pick 27 books, and your parents let you buy 2. This was so long ago that your parents gave you money in an envelope, which you then carried to school and gave to the teacher. She put in a big envelope and went to Mexico and really got drunk. No, that was just my teacher. Most of the teachers put the money in a big envelope and mailed the money to Scholastic Books. Now, it took so long for Scholastic Books to get the money and get the book back that you forgot. And one day you come in from recess, there on your desk. It's like Christmas. I'm 65 years old. I can still remember. You know why Scholastic Books has survived all of the changes in the publishing industry? They were the ones behind Harry Potter. Because Scholastic Books has this very unusual idea. The president of the company at the time, now deceased, was in a warehouse. Guy's driving a forklift, and he says to the guy, he says, what is your job here? Now, at some level, that's kind of a stupid question, isn't it? The guy drives a forklift. Never confuse your job with your work. Your work is what you do. Your job is why you do it. And the guy said, sir, it is my job to help children learn to love reading. The guy driving the forklift knew that if he damaged a box of books, it might disappoint a kid. The guy driving the forklift knew that if he put the box in the wrong place, it might slow down the shipment. And when you have an organization where everybody, bottom to top, top to bottom, understands not what they do, but why, that's what creates companies that last. That's what creates unstoppable cultures. You got to have a why. Now, the problem with a lot of companies, people know why, but well, I was doing a software update online some years ago with a company. Let's call them Norton Utilities because that was their name. And I was doing this update, and it crashed my computer. And for the next 2 days, I talked to 8 different people at Norton Utilities about how to fix my computer. All 8 people told me what to do. I did it. My computer was still broke. I finally, out of desperation, had to hire a computer consultant to come in and reinstall my hard drive. And today, when I talk about those people at Norton Utilities, I say they were all zeros. Now, here's what I want you to notice. They all took action, didn't they? They told me what to do. Unfortunately, my computer still stayed broke. See, taking action doesn't count. What would have happened if one of those 8 people said, Mr. Sanborn, I know you're upset. First of all, here's my direct dial number so you don't have to work with a different person every time. I'm going to help you get your computer fixed if I have to fly to Denver to do it. Now, that would have sounded good, but they wouldn't have had to fly to Denver to do it. All they needed to do is take responsibility. A hero takes action. A zero takes action. A hero takes responsibility. A hero fixes it, gets it done, produces the result. They don't just go through the motions. And a lot of people hide behind taking action. Did what I was supposed to do, followed the procedures, didn't break any rules. The people who get ahead, the Freds of the world, the people who choose to be extraordinary focus on the output, not the input. Action is an input. Creating results is an output. I fly a lot. I was on an airplane a few years ago. We're at the gate. Pilot comes on and says, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a delay here. We've got a little problem. And then it probably goes an hour before he comes back. He says, well, we figured out what the problem is. It's a mechanic. So we're looking for a part. An hour later, he comes back and he says, we aren't able to locate a part to fix the mechanic, but we're hoping that maybe there's an airplane in the fleet they can give us. And then an hour later, they canceled the flight. And we're getting off the airplane, and the guy behind me says, well, there's nothing they could do about it. It was a mechanical. It's not their fault. I said, whose fault is it? Maintenance keeps planes in the air, excuse me. When they do break, you should have parts to fix them. You got mechanics to fix them with the parts. And if you don't have the parts, you're supposed to have extra airplanes in the fleet to get people where they're going. It was completely their responsibility. Weather, not their responsibility. But how an airline responds to weather is, whether they keep you informed, whether they make your way comfortable, whether they give you alternatives. In other words, even things that aren't your fault become your responsibility. So I wrote a blog about this particular area. And a guy wrote on my blog, an anonymous snarky comment. He says, Sanborn, quit whining. You got there safely. That's all that matters. What would happen if you said to your parents, they say, how was High Point? You say, I graduated alive. No, that wouldn't be enough. See, the airlines, maybe the airline's motto should be, at least you didn't die. But see, we all expect more than simply getting to our destination alive, going through 4 years alive. It's about the journey and what people do to take responsibility to make it a good one. Number 2, it's all built on relationships. There's 2 things in life, and you're being taught it here. It's one of the few places I can say it's taught. 2 things in life we're not taught how to do. Number 1, we're not taught how to raise kids. By the time you figure it out, too late. They're already grown. But the second thing you're not taught in life is how to build relationships. Dr. Cubain says it well, expectation without education equals frustration. So in the Fred Factor, I talk about relationship building. See, managers have power over people. But if you choose to be an extraordinary leader, you have power with people. People don't cooperate with you because they have to. They cooperate with you because they want to. It's the difference between compliance and commitment. Somebody once asked me, they said, in our business, we need a lot of customers for brief periods of time. Is it possible to do relationship building when you have just mostly interactions? And I said, actually, it is. I was staying in a hotel in Florida. I had some dry cleaning I needed to send out. And a bellcap came up to get my dry cleaning. And when I handed it to him, I was wearing a Harley-Davidson shirt. And he said, hey, you must ride. I said, I do. You must ride too. He asked about my bike. I asked about his. He asked what events I'd been to. We had a nice conversation for 3 or 4 minutes. The rest of the stay at that hotel, there were at least 7 other bellcaps. None of them knew who I was. I didn't know them. They didn't know me. Every time he saw me, he waved. Every time I saw him, I waved back. See, what we had wasn't just an interaction. If he'd have picked up my laundry and left, that would have been an interaction. He created a connection. A connection is a moment of shared affinity. It can be as simple as a compliment. It can be as dramatic as taking time to encourage somebody who's down. But it takes that moment that you're in front of another person, and it finds the humanity, the heart of the situation. Now, here's what's interesting. There's actually research. How many connections does it take to create a relationship? The answer is 5. If over time you run into somebody 5 times and momentarily create a connection, that is the beginning of a real relationship. In the book, I talk about the 7 B's of relationship building. First is be real. Be yourself, but be your best self. Did you ever hear somebody do something really bad and their excuse was, just being myself? Guess what? We have a higher nature and a lower nature. And on a good day, I play by my higher nature. On a really bad day, I play on my lower nature. We choose. Just as you choose to be extraordinary, you choose to be your best self or your not so good self. And that's called authenticity. One of the things I admire about digitals and millennials, we were taught in my generation to appear successful, to fake it till you make it, which is the worst advice I've ever heard. You know what happens if you fake it till you make it? When you make it, you're still a fake. Be yourself, but be your best self. That is authenticity. My generation was taught about appearances. You believe that it's not about being perfect, it's about being real. The second be interested. We were all taught growing up the best way to be popular was to be interesting, to be a good athlete or a good student or to have a good joke to tell or a funny story. You know what the world is starved for? Not people who are interesting, but people who are interested. People who put the focus on us, not themselves. And that's hard to do. That is one of the hardest things today in the world we live in, is to focus on the other person without multitasking, without checking our phone. Maybe you're on a phone call, you're on your computer. People know when you're not present. Some of you heard John Maxwell. I wish I had said it. John says, when you value people, you add value to people. That's how you add value to people. Is you value them. You find out about them. You compliment them on their successes. You encourage them in their disappointments. It's about being interested, being knowledgeable. I had an insurance broker for 25 years. Last week, they effectively threw me under the bus in a serious negotiation with an insurance company. They sent me an email that said, there's nothing we can do. And I called a friend who is a connector. Do you have a friend like that? If you need something done, I'm not talking about like killing somebody and burying them. I just mean when you need like a referral or you need somebody to help you. They always know. And he referred somebody, and in one phone call, the broker who was not my broker and I was not his client gave me more information than I'd had in the last 2 years with my insurance broker. So that day I wrote an email. It said, you're fired. I switched all of my policies over that day because the person I talked to was knowledgeable. Knowledge creates value. And when you're willing to share knowledge, that made me more powerful as a customer. Be knowledgeable, be empathic. Be honest, do you always feel the same way other people feel? I don't. A lot of people I meet, I think, whoa, what's that about? Empathy is the ability to understand how people feel, even if you don't feel that way. It's a critical life skill. That's what we need in our political system. Right now, our political system is about who can shout the loudest, who can denigrate the worst, who can make the most grandiose claims. Empathy says if you can understand how the other person feels, you may not even agree with them, but you've built a bridge. Empathy is a bridge. It's when you're able to say, you know what? I don't understand how you feel because I feel that way, but I understand how frustrated you must be that happened. And empathy, they call it now, the fancy word or phrase is cognitive empathy because they've parsed it out from practical to cognitive. But the ability to understand the other point of view, that's what builds relationships and bridges. Tell the truth. Be honest. Mirabeau, the French philosopher, said if honesty did not exist, somebody should invent it as the best way of getting rich. Be helpful. I'm going to give you a technique, very specific technique that you can use to be helpful. Last night, I've been to the steakhouse on campus 6 times, and I never can find it. And last night, I met a guy named Nolan. I don't see him in the room. I said, hey, Nolan, where's the steakhouse? He goes, well, I'm going that way if you don't mind. And we walked together and had a brief conversation. See, that's being helpful. He could have said, go back to that intersection, go left. It'll be on your right. What a cool thing. Just talk about the heart or humanity of connecting with people. So I remember his name. I remember that he's majoring in physiology. I remember that he wrestled in high school like I wrestled in high school, and that happened in about 2 minutes. Why? Because he was helpful. And finally, be prompt. Because the only thing the average person today has less of than disposable income is disposable time. Time is the scarcest commodity we have in life. You can waste my money, I won't be happy. You waste my time, I'll be angry because I'll never get the time back. 7B's a relationship building. Nothing odd in there, nothing intrusive, nothing that would be off-putting to another person, but you have to be aware. Someone once said, most people don't need to be taught, they need only to be reminded. There's a checklist for relationship building. Number 3, continually create value for others. Ask yourself a question, don't have to answer out loud. What value have you created for another human being in the last 24 hours? Now, you probably don't think about it in terms of value. You might think about how you help someone, how you talk to someone, how you listen to someone. How do you create value? Here's a formula that will make you a superstar at any company you ever work at. You replace money with imagination. You outthink rather than outspend your competition. It's the little things that add value. Little things make a big difference. When my sons were little, we used to go to On the Border. I don't know if you have On the Border where you grew up or where you live. On the Border is a really mediocre Tex-Mex restaurant. But on Monday nights, they had a great value proposition. Kids ate free, and they served tequila. This is a wonderful value proposition. My kids ate free, the money I saved, I drank tequila, everybody left happy. One night, my wife, Darla, says, I'm not feeling well, get me something to do. We get there that night, our wait person, her name is, because she got a little name tag, Alicia, which is Spanish for Alicia. And I said, Alicia, we're gonna order our food, but we're gonna order some food to go because my wife's not feeling well. And at the end of the dinner, when she brought out the plastic bag with the containers, she'd written on one of the containers in red ink, hope you're feeling better, smiley face, Alicia. And when we got home, my wife said, who's Alicia? And I said, no, it's not that. Alicia was our wait person. I told her you didn't feel well. And my wife was touched. I mean, that was just, took her 3 seconds to write that note. So the next time we went back to On the Border, we said, is Alicia working? And they said, she is. And we said, can we sit in her section? Later we went back and we said, is Alicia working? They said, her section's full. What did we say? We'll wait. Companies don't give good service. People do. You know you are a rock star when people ask for you by name, not by department. There are certain people, and they're called Freds. We call them because we know even if it isn't their job, they're going to help us out. They're going to take care of it. And that was a good example how Alicia, all she had was her imagination and a red ink pen. And then I'm staying at in the Gaslamp district of San Diego. This was back when collars were much longer on shirts, and we used to actually use collar stays. They were either metal or plastic little spears you put in your collars to keep them from curling. It's about 10 o'clock at night. I don't have any collar stays. I go down to the front desk, and there's a bell cap, kind of a surfer dude, long blonde hair, little hat. And I said, sir, where may I buy collar stays? He said, dude, you can't. I said, what do you mean? He said, only bars and restaurants open now. I said, oh, no, what am I going to do? He said, oh, don't worry, I'll hook you up. And he goes to the front desk, and he gets a pair of scissors and a key card just like this, and he makes me collar stays. That hotel, it's a 5-star hotel. It's nice. You know what I remember about it? Nothing, except the guy who made me the collar stays. See, one of the things that Freds learn is that sameness sucks. It's about being different in a way that people value. That's how you add value. You're not just different weird. You can be weird. That's not different I'm talking about. Different that people value. Using your ingenuity to create collar stays. Or in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, flown all over the world. This only happened to me once. You know how when you gate check your bag at a regional airline or a regional airport, your carry-on, you have to leave at the end of the concourse. They take it down, put it in the belly of the plane, and then they bring it up. What happens at the end of the flight when they bring the bags up? Everybody's panicking, trying to get their bag, and they're trying to find their bag, and they're trying to get their handle up. Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the guy that brought up the bags, every bag he brought up, he pulled up the handle. Now, you think that doesn't sound like anything. It's a big deal. Made all the difference in the world for people being able to find and get their bags and get out of the way. All it took was, I don't even know, an entire second. He added value by thinking about how can I make it a little more convenient for the flyers. My favorite bar in South Denver, White chocolate grill. There's only 3 in the United States. You order a Manhattan or a martini. Halfway through it, they bring a chilled glass out of the refrigerator and they transfer your drink. Your glass is always cold. If you drink slow, they bring a second chilled glass and they re-chill your drink. This was the only restaurant I'd ever been at that did it. And it's such a cool thing that people talk about it. Why? What did I just say? Sameness, people don't talk about. Different, that's value, they talk about. So I would say this is the only restaurant, White Chocolate Grill, and then I worked for Firebirds. At the time, the guy who was the president was named Mark Eason, and I was telling this story, and Mark said, "Oh, we do that too." Here goes my only restaurant in America. He goes, "Well, I need to tell you why we do it." We looked at buying White Chocolate Grill. That's what we learned. Isn't that cool? Only one other restaurant ever copied their idea, and that was a restaurant chain that thought about buying that chain. Copy your competitors. Only do it a little bit better than your competitors do. We're dog people. We have little tiny rat dogs. Ours are 5 and 8 pounds. A friend of mine just started a dog wash business where they'll build a dog wash in your garage for $3,500. We wash ours in a sink. They're little tiny dogs. And I take my dog to Starbucks. Why? Because Starbucks adds value through the puppuccino. They fill up a little glass of whipped cream. It makes your dog diabetic. The vet loves it. And whenever I take my dog, they give her a little thing of whipped cream, which she licks all the way home. See, if you're a dog person and somebody's nice to your dog, they're nice to you. How about this one? I stay in hotels. Sometimes I'll step into the bathtub, the drain plug is down. I would rather reach into a vat of thermonuclear waste than to touch a drain plug in a public hotel room. So I'm checking out one time and they said, "How was your stay?" I said, "It was great, except for one thing." They said, "What's that?" I said, "The stopper was down." They said, "Why?" I said, "I don't know. You tell me, it's your hotel. Why'd you put the stopper down?" So over the years, when I would work with hotel chains, and I've worked with at least a half dozen, I'd say, "Why do housekeepers put the stopper down?" And you know what every one of them said? They're not supposed to. We don't know why they do it. We think some do it because they make you think they clean the tub because the stopper's down. Here's how you create value. Find out what irritates your customer. Find out what bothers the person you want to do business with. And be the first hotel chain to say, "No stoppers down." I mean, create this kind of thing where I know when I stay at XYZ hotel, now if it's a shower, it's a different deal. But the stopper's going to be up. Why? Little things make a big difference. Here's what most business people don't know. You don't just create value by what you do. You create value by what you don't do. Here's the killer app for business in 2024 and beyond. It was the killer app in 2004 when the book came out. It's still the killer app for the 20th anniversary edition. It's free to everybody. It's seldom used by anybody. It's called Thoughtful. It says, slow down for a moment and look for opportunities to add value. Doesn't have to take much time. Doesn't have to cost any money. Doesn't require much effort. But see, when you're going 100 miles an hour, you don't notice. I'm an offender. I mean, one of the nice things about being a professional speaker is it reminds you of what you need to be doing. And I'm reminded, I was getting off an airplane, and there was an older person being pushed in a wheelchair up the concourse. So wherever, or up the what's the word? It's not the concourse, jetway. And as she came to where the jetway, the metal joints were, this really tiny person who's pushing the chair couldn't get the chair over the joints. And I remember thinking, wait, I'm somebody strong enough to push the chair, and I'm in a hurry. So I say, "Excuse me," I slide around, and the guy behind me says, "Can I help you, ma'am?" And it was like a bolt of lightning. I saw an obstacle. He saw an opportunity. I was thinking about me. He was thinking about her. So even though I talk about this stuff, I have to remind myself that you can't be of value when you're going too fast for people to catch up to you. One-a-day principle. Want to challenge you to start doing this just for fun. You don't have to. I can't check up on you. You won't get graded for it. Once a day, find one person to do something extraordinary for. Could be a friend, could be a stranger, could be a professor, could be another student, could be somebody who works in food service, doesn't matter. But just find somebody to do something super nice for. When I was flying in HPU's always nice to send a car to Charlotte because flying into the Greensboro airport has not worked well for me. And so I knew I'd have a driver in Greensboro. And so I asked Elena, I said, tell me about Leah. And she said, oh, she's our most requested driver. And she loves HPU women's basketball. She's got 3 sons. She's got grandkids. She sent me about 5 bullet points. So when I got to the airport, Leah texted me yesterday and she said, Mr. Sanborn, I'm here to pick you up. And I said, Leah, I'm lucky to have High Point's #1 requested driver. You're a rock star. And then later on, I said, so you got 3 sons. You're like, what is that? And finally, she goes, how do you know this? I said, spy, CIA. No, I explained. I said, Elena told me. And I brought a Fred Factor book because she is a Fred. She's really, really, if you've never met Leah, she's terrific. She adds value. She's a connector. And I signed a book to her. And that was yesterday, not because I had to, but because it was the most fun I had all day yesterday, something I did as much for me as for her. Because see, you want to live outside yourself. We get so self-absorbed, and when you look for a way to do something really nice for somebody else, sure, it benefits them, but the truth is, it benefits you as well. So you don't have to give somebody a book, but once a day, look for somebody. I call it the 1-a-day principle. You can do something extraordinary for. Point 3.5, and this isn't in the book that you're going to get, but this is in the next book, the sequel. Work together, because the only thing more powerful than a Fred is a team of Freds. I'll give anybody a different free book of their choice if they can tell me this guy's name. And here's a clue. He's this guy's brother. Now, some of you may not even recognize the quote-unquote famous guy, but that is Walt Disney. Walt's the guy with the mustache. That's Roy Disney, who's also an older version on the left. And the reason I put Roy Disney's photo up, everybody knows about his brother in the theme parks, but most people don't know about a quote attributed to Roy Disney. Roy said, excuse me, when values are clear, decision-making is easy. When values are clear, decision-making is easy. It's not rules, regulations, policies, and procedures. It's living by your university's values or your employer's values, or most importantly of all, your own values. That's my son, Hunter. He's 26. He's a first lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps. That's a Goshawk. That's a trainer. He was flying. He'll be winging in July and probably going on to fly the F-35. And if you are into airplanes, the F-35 is as good as it gets. The reason I put him up, not just because I'm proud as hell of him, but when he graduated from Ohio State, before he could become a Marine officer, he had to go through something called OCS, Officer Candidate School. It is a lot like what the SEALs go through called BUDS to become SEALs. It's not quite as intense, but it's intense. It's 3 or 4 weeks of mental challenge, physical challenge, of attitudinal challenge. It's tough. So when you graduate from OCS, not everybody does, then you become a second lieutenant. And after he graduated, we were sitting on our patio. He had come home to visit, and a friend of mine was there with his 16-year-old son. My friend Peter said to my son Hunter, he said, hey, Hunter, what's the most important thing you learned in officer candidate school? By the way, that's a really good question to ask people. I don't do it enough. What's the most important thing you learned when you were there, when you did this, when you visited that? And he said, what was the most important thing you learned at officer candidate school? And Hunter didn't hesitate. He said, oh, that's easy. Here's what it's about. That I would die for the man or woman next to me on the battlefield. I never heard him say that before. My friend was taken back because he had a son that may someday be in the military, and he said, Hunter, I got to be honest with you, I'm not sure. I like that. That's the most important lesson. Hunter said, that's because you don't understand. When you're willing to die for the man or woman next to you on the battlefield, that man or woman are willing to die for you. Good news is we don't have to make life sacrifices in the jobs that we hold. But the reason I tell that story is because even though I wrote a book on team building, it never became more powerful to me than when I heard my own son talk about mutual commitment. I'll tell you, you don't always like the man or woman on the battlefield. You don't always like the people on your team. But what makes teamwork work is when everybody in a business is committed to the customer and to each other. Because I know if you've got my back and I've got your back, we're unstoppable. Only two ways to grow after you graduate from High Point, only two ways to grow. The business you start, maybe you'll switch to the new entrepreneurial school when it opens. Only two ways to grow the business that you will go to work in for your family. Only two ways to grow in any company where you are employed. Number one, grow yourself. Number two, grow your team. Everything rests on education. The more you learn and the more you apply it, the more you help your team learn, the more they apply it, the more effective, productive, efficient, profitable, innovative you will be. Most people graduate from college and believe they have closed a chapter on their education book. And yet for me, the most important stuff I've learned outside of the classroom. What I learned in the classroom was important, but it was just a foundation. The greatest gift my father ever gave me was he taught me to love learning. A good teacher, a good professor teaches you a subject. A great professor teaches you to love learning. My dad was never a professor, but he taught me to love learning, and that's driven everything I've done in my life. How do you create a team of friends? First, find the people on your team who are doing good work and recognize them for it. If you want to be, it doesn't matter what kind of team it is, people want to be acknowledged and appreciated. Reward people who exhibit Fred-like behavior. Don't take them for granted, which we often do. The better people perform over time, the less we notice. Just as a result, and you're going to get a copy of the 20th anniversary book, you can educate people because people need examples and ideas, and I've tried to include some today. But the most important way you create friends is you demonstrate it in your own life. You become like Fred Shea, who labored in obscurity for most of his professional life, never expected to have the attention of an international best-selling book because he simply did the best job he could every day, and that was his reward. Not everybody gets the book. Not everybody gets the accolades. But I guarantee you, if Fred was here today, as much as he loves the book and the recognition, he will tell you the greatest reward he has is internal, knowing he's done his best. Fourth and last principle, reinvent yourself regularly. When you wake up in the morning, you have a choice. Are you going to innovate or replicate? You're going to do it like you did yesterday or do something new today. Every day I'm looking for little tweaks. I call them tweaks. That's a common term. Little things I can do to improve the quality of my life, my business, or the life and business of somebody else. Problem is we get into a rut. We do the same things. We become creatures of habit. That's how we end up on autopilot. When Hunter, the Marine, was 5 years old, I walked him in on his first day of kindergarten, walking him into the classroom, and on the way in, Hunter looks up. He said, "Dad, what's the most important thing?" And I think, oh, that's my boy. He wants to excel in kindergarten. And I stopped. This is called the teachable moment. I stopped and I said, well, three things, son. I said, number one, mind the teacher. I said, number two, play nicely with other children. And to be honest, I didn't have a third one. I had to pull it out of my ear. And I said, and study hard. Can you even do that in kindergarten? I mean, is studying hard? And I don't think so, but it sounded good. Hunter looked up at me, he crossed his arms, he goes, Dad, that's not the most important thing. I now know I'm being asked a rhetorical question by a 5-year-old. I said, okay, Hunt, what's the most important thing? And so help me, he said, love is, Dad. Out of the mouths of babes. When I wrote the Fred Factor, I put the word in love 16 times. When the book was edited, they took it out. Every time love appeared, they put generosity of spirit. So it's still that way in the 20th anniversary edition. If you come to generosity of spirit, cross it out and write in love, because that's the way I wrote it. And I said to my editor, I said, Roger, why are you taking out the word love? And he said, because love freaks out business people. You talk about love in a business book, it'll be off-putting. You know what? He was only half-putting. Love freaks out everybody. Because we think it's romantic or sensual or syrupy or sweet or familial. But I want to define love in work clothes. Love is treating people with dignity and respect, regardless how you feel about them. And I still believe love. My friend Tim Sanders wrote a book 30 years ago called Love is the Killer App, and it's still a classic for that reason. He talks about love as the difference maker in business, it's the difference maker in life. And so when you get to the end of my book, I talk about the three loves. The three loves that make you a friend. This is Lindsay Owen Jones, retired chairman of L'Oreal. Forbes magazine said to Lindsay, what is the secret of L'Oreal's success? One of the most successful companies in the world. And Lizzie said, if there's a reason why we are successful, it is because we love this business a little bit more than our competition. When you go about finding a job, find a job if you can. You might not be able to, but eventually, if not right away, find a job you love, a job you do, even if they didn't pay you to do it, because the fact they'll pay you to do it and that you love it will make all the difference. My first job out of college I did not love, but I learned enough that I eventually waylaid it into a career of my own design. And life is a lot more fun when you love what you do. Number one, you got to love what you do. Number two, love who you do it with, the people on your team. Have that mutual commitment, even if you share a different point of view. Even if you don't always see eye to eye, be committed to them as they are to you so that you can provide an extraordinary product or service. And finally, you probably can see this coming a mile away. Love the people you do it. We call them different things: customers, clients, patients. They voted with their feet and their money, and they've trusted you to provide a product or a service. Because, see, here's my final thought today. If you love what you do, and you love who you do it with, and you love who you do it for, whether or not you ever heard me speak or read my book, I can tell you with good authority, you're already a friend. Thank you, and be extraordinary.